Thanks for joining us. Another edition of Good and Plenty. I'm your host, Jeff Goodman. Today's show should be a fun one. We bring on a guy, a former AAU coach, who worked for Andy Miller, who was caught up in the FBI investigation, involved in the trials that are ongoing right now in New York, and that is Matt Ramker. He's now a financial planner, but Ramker has some interesting stories that he will tell in this episode. Remember, subscribe, iTunes, Stitcher, CLNS Media. You can find me at Goodman Hoops on Twitter. You can also find me on Stadium at watchstadium.com. Every Tuesday, NBA edition of the pod. Every Thursday, the college edition. And again, send us your reviews on iTunes. We can certainly use them. They certainly do help us. But now let's get to Matt Ramker, who's got some interesting stuff about the world of college basketball at the grassroots level. Now joining me, special guest. I think it's appropriate, certainly for the time of year and certainly what's going on within college basketball. And welcome in Matt Ramker, a longtime AAU coach for the Florida Rams, also a guy who worked as an NBA agent, worked with, for, however you want to say it, Andy Miller, who's been in the news plenty, and now he's a financial planner for coaches. Matt, how are you?
Doing great, Jeff. How are you today?
I'm well. As we record this on a Wednesday afternoon, TJ Gasnola, who you actually kind of worked with to some extent under Andy Miller, took the stand. But, you know, the first thing I want to get, and I think most people want to know this, and it's kind of a broad question, but it's the question of, like, how is the sausage made? And I know it's broad. I get it. But, like, how does this whole thing work? Because people still that aren't really involved in the game at the grassroots level don't understand how the whole agent, AAU, player, how all of this works. Can you, for layman's terms, try to put that in perspective?
I mean, I think, you know, every agent, you know, wants to establish some kind of pipeline, and starting off, you know, in the grassroots, that's, you know, the easiest place to establish it. So I think, you know, over the course of the last 15 to 20 years, there's been a major push from agents aligning themselves with, you know, various AAU programs throughout the country.
How did you first get involved in that? Like, how did you get, you know, was it first with the AAU team and running the Florida Rams? You know, when I first met you years ago, that's kind of what you were doing. But how did you get involved in this game?
Well, I actually met Andy Miller way before the Florida Rams, before I really had anything substantial going on. I was an intern for Joe Abunassar at the IMG Basketball Academy in Bradenton. And at that time, Andy had all his top clients training down there and was very close with Joe. And you know, Joe knew some of my aspirations of working in basketball, so he made an introduction to Andy, and, you know, that was 2003, and we, you know, formed a very tight relationship throughout the years.
And then you started with AAU ball when and how?
Well, that's actually a pretty funny story. So I was a manager for University of South Florida's basketball program and heavily involved in the recruiting. And the assistant coach at the time, David Zimroth, introduced me to a guy named Travis King, who is now an agent and very successful. And at that time, Travis King was running Nike Team Florida, and I was a sophomore or a junior in college, and I essentially was his gopher and ran around and did everything for him. And we had Amar'e Stoudemire, and I was in charge of making sure Amar'e got to practice every time, and that was my main
How did that go?
responsibility. I went fine. I just had to drive all over Creation to go pick him up, and you know, that was my first foray into the business. And when I first, my eyes really opened to the business of basketball when I got sent to Nike camp with Amar'e his junior year, just me and Amar'e, and you know, was his first, you know, explosion onto the national scene. And all of a sudden I was getting inundated with people coming and wanting to talk to me, and I had no idea anything. Amar'e is getting mobbed. It was a whole circus. And, that was a real eye-opening experience, and worked with Travis, and then worked with another program, Tallahassee Wildcats with Adidas, and we had some very successful players in there, and forged a lot of relationships with the brass at Adidas, and was fortunate enough to get my own program in 2005.
So, when you go out with Amar'e, do you see some of these things that are going on in terms of people offering him money? People, you hear about it now with Brian Bowen Sr. saying that, Ty Streets paid him $5,000 to have his son play on the Mean Streets program, and other AAU teams are offering him money to play for them. I think it was the Michigan Mustangs for the summer, and it was an obscene, for me, kind of an obscene amount for a kid like Brian Bowen, who's not even a top 10 player. Did you start to see this immediately with Amar'e?
I saw, some things transpire that, really opened my eyes, and it was an everyday battle whether we were going to be able to keep Amar'e. Literally, hour by hour, it was this guy, somebody's trying to come take him, this guy's trying to go see his mom in jail, trying to cut deals, and I just remember his mom got out of jail right before the Boo Williams tournament, and Amar'e was going to the famed academic institution known as Emmanuel Academy at the time in Raleigh.
Yeah.
And we were driving to the Boo Williams tournament, and we stopped in Raleigh to spend the night for the purposes of getting Amar'e to, take him up to Boo Williams. And I'll never forget, we got our vans loaded, we're getting ready to go, and here comes screeching around the corner a Mercedes-Benz, 400, 500 series, screeching around the corner, tires screeching, and out comes Amar'e Stoudemire. And all of a sudden, she was bailed out of jail, and she was there. And
who bailed her out? Who bailed her out? Any idea?
George Raveling.
That's great.
And so, that kind of enhanced the circus a little bit. And I know there was a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff. I was 21 years old. I wasn't privy to any of the deals that may have been made, but I definitely saw a lot of interesting things at a very young age.
So you get it going. Florida Rams was kind of the team that, again, you had been with some other AAU teams before that, but that was kind of your deal for the most part, and you had a lot of high-level players. So how did it work at that point with you and Andy Miller? You already had a relationship with him. What's the relationship like then? Is he putting pressure on you to, who are your best players then? Is he trying to say, hey, listen, I need these guys to go with me, and if they do, I'll give you however much money. How did the whole thing work?
There was never any pressure, and I say that honestly because I met Andy at such a young age, and I didn't have any players. There was no reason for him to deal with me, and he actually gave me the time of day, and tried to help me get some internships with a couple of NBA teams, and was, really helpful, and probably because of the relationship with Joe Abunassar, and Joe and I were very close then and still are very close. So he had always tried to look out for me. I don't know if, his vision was someday I may have some players, who knows? But once we got it rolling, and had guys that had potential to play in the NBA, there was never even a second thought of who my guys would go with if I had any say-so in it. I never met with another NBA agent at any point in time when we had the Florida Rams. Andy was my guy through and through, and if the kids wanted my advice, that's who I was going to send them to. He had Kevin Garnett and Chauncey Billups, and was arguably, one of the top three agents in the game. And I think part of me had visions of working for him at some point, so I figured if I helped him get some players whenever I decided to go into the agent business, that, hopefully there would be a job waiting for me.
So in 2012, you're one of four teams that was banned by the NCAA for playing in certified events due to your relationship with Andy Miller. Some emails surfaced, right? And the NCAA cracks down and says, all right, these 4 guys, they're done. They can't go out. They can't have any sort of relationship with their programs. TJ Gasnola also being one of them at the time. What was your reaction to that?
I was pretty pissed and pretty upset. The Florida Rams were my life's work. They bore the name of the first 3 letters of my last name. We started from scratch and built it. And, that was my livelihood. I ran tournaments and camps, and had a real basketball business that, centered around us having a high profile AAU basketball team. So, when the NCAA came and, arbitrarily just took my livelihood from me, I was pretty devastated. It was a rough time.
What did you think about the way they did it and how they tried to, again, make it clear that they didn't want any agents having any interactions with any AAU coaches, yet this was going on? Like, how rampant is this? Because Andy Miller was a guy who, when I talked to a lot of college coaches, some loved him and some couldn't stand him because, frankly, they felt like he would go around them. A lot of college coaches, whether it was him, whether it was maybe some of the guys he had working for him or whatnot. But, like, how rampant was this whole thing, do you think, within college basketball and agents, dealing and having a crew like Andy Miller kind of had of AAU coaches? Or was this more specific to Andy?
I don't think it was specific to Andy. I think it was pretty widespread. I think people pacified the college coaches and still pacify them a little bit, but they know that they're not going to get any help from them. So they're going and trying to deal with the people that, are going to help them. I mean, I know a very specific story I was involved in back in 2009. We were recruiting James Johnson. I had a kid on Wake Forest team that played in my AAU program. He was James' very close friend. Him and Teague, the 3 of them came in together, and I got introduced to James, and we were, developed a great relationship. James said he wanted to go with us. Everything was good to go. And then all of a sudden, Dino Gaudio caught wind of it and basically brought the kid in the office and said, you can sign with anybody, but you're not signing with Andy Miller, and just completely blew it up. And, that was like 4 months worth of work that just got blown out of the water. And maybe a phone call to Dino Gaudio would have helped that, but probably not.
How many guys are already accounted for by the time they step foot on a college campus? What would you say of like the elite guys? What percentage do you think are already done for a specific agent?
I would say if we're talking 10 to 15 players, out of those 10 to 15, probably half to 3/4. I think a lot of it depends on what AAU program they come from, what kind of parents they have. If their parents are looking to make a deal, there's plenty of people to make deals with them. If their parents think the agent business is a little, shady and, they want to wait till they're in college or rely on their college coach to help guide them through that. I think it really depends on who's calling the shots. But if they're playing for an AAU program that is aligned with a high-profile agent, I think that's a pretty good conclusion that they're done before they even get to college.
And on that, like as an agent and as a guy who was also an AAU coach, and I've heard plenty of these stories from kids that I knew well, and you see it with Dennis Smith. Okay, like Dennis Smith, obviously he was taking money here, or his dad was taking money while he was still back in high school or AAU or whatnot. Like, give me examples, Matt, of how you're taking care of kids in different situations, whether, it could be at a low level and just giving them, $100 for something, or are you taking care of them, to make sure that you're going to be their agent when it comes time for them, choosing somebody?
I mean, I never paid anybody a set amount of money to come play for my AAU program. I felt like if, we put on a good program and I gave them an opportunity to get exposure and guided them academically, and was loyal to them, that they would be with me. And every kid and parent in my program knew that if they needed something, they could come and ask me for it. If they needed money for a light bill, or their phone was getting turned off, or, parent needed to come on the trip to see their child, I always took care of it. And that went for the superstar all the way to the 12th guy. And, I felt like, I did for the same for everybody. So I never had any confliction morally, whether I was breaking any rules, and I could give a damn about the NCAA. I think they're the most hypocritical organization around. And, what I did for the superstars, I did for the kids that were going Division II. And if they needed something, I took care of them.
All right, so I have two questions coming on this. I'll get back to the why the NCAA is so hypocritical, because I want to get you to go in on that a little bit. But first, so you said you never really paid a kid to play on your AAU program, as we saw like Ty Streets, the allegations that he paid $5,000 to get Brian Bowen and Michigan Mustangs, whatnot. How about when a kid was in college? And, like Maurice Spates, let's say Maurice Spates for an example, right? So he's at Florida. He played for your program. He's going to be a first-round pick. Are you taking care of him? And how are you taking care of him when he's at Florida?
We didn't have to take care of him at all. I never gave him any money. He was getting Pell Grant and stuff at Florida, and he was never, focused on that. And it didn't really happen until towards the end of his sophomore year, when, people were coming out of the woodwork and banging on his door at Florida and trying to, pay some of his family members and, do some real shady stuff that we even encountered any of that. Maurice was a very under the radar kid. Yeah. And it was different.
What about some of the bigger kids? What about some of the kids, Matt, that maybe you didn't coach, let's say, but you're going after for Andy, that you had a little bit of relationship with? Did you feel the need to have to do something? Like, I've heard kids getting like iPads from agents, stuff like that. Like, they show up at their doorstep, like all these different things to try to get them to go with the agent. And I've heard stories about, a kid, I'm not going to say who it is, but a kid making a deal, his father making a deal with an agent while he's still in high school. And when he gets to the NBA, he looks at his paycheck, and his paycheck is so much lower than everybody else's. And he's like, what the hell happened? Well, basically that agent had been funding the father for all these years, and he was now taking that money out of his son's paycheck. Just things like that are just, again, shady. Some of these kids don't even know what's going on with their situations and what their parents are doing. I still believe, and maybe I'm naive to it, I still believe, Matt, that Brian Bowen did not really know what the hell was going on with his father taking taking the money from Louisville and dealing with all these schools.
I agree with that. I think the majority of the time, the kids are in the dark. And, to speak to your question, I always took a stance that I didn't need to pay anybody. And I tried to rely on my relationships I had, or developing relationships that became so strong that when I brought our brand, which ASM Sports was one of the top brands in the agent business, and bringing Andy in to, close the deal, Andy was the absolute best in the meeting. If it was a fair fight, we had a really good chance to win. I personally never, went down that route. I can't speak for others, but that's just something that, I didn't do. But it certainly happens. And I, again, agree completely with you that the kids are in the dark for sure. Some of them may be complicit to it, but I think by and large that the parents and the handlers are only letting the kids know what the moves that are being made when it's time to sign the contract.
Listen, I asked Renardo Sidney, I spoke to him a couple months ago, and I'm going to write something at some point. I asked him, did he know what was going on with his father? He said, well, we're living in a $1 million mansion in L.A. They moved out from Mississippi. I said, well, didn't you ask him? Like, how? He goes, no, I was like a 15, 16-year-old kid. Like, I'm not asking my dad that. Like, I don't care. I know I'm living in $1 million house. I'm not asking questions. I'm living the life.
And that's an extreme, overt situation. I'm talking about, if parents are getting, $3,000-5,000 a month and, a job or, like something that isn't easily distinguished, like they could very easily hide that from their children. And it happens all the time.
Why is the NCAA so hypocritical in your opinion?
I feel like they, are making billions of dollars and they've tried to cut other people off from being able to earn an income, and they put all these regulations in place and try to handcuff everybody. And, with my situation, I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was affiliated with Andy. The way they got me was that they said I was given, my players benefits, which I already said I took care of everybody. And they said, since I was affiliated with Andy, that I was technically an agent. And it was just a very loose interpretation, but they have a monopoly. They control all the AAU programs. And if they don't want you to play, you can't play. And, I just felt like my situation was handled very poorly. And they had made their minds up at an early stage what my fate was going to be. And then just the way they did it and sprung it on us July 5th when we were leaving July 10th is just very poor on their part. There's no love lost between me and the NCAA.
Have you heard about hemp for health? Cannabinoids are naturally occurring antioxidants and neuroprotectants found in hemp plants. These hemp plants and their products, by the way, are totally legal in all 50 states. So these cannabinoids from hemp, and CBD in particular, are pretty popular in health circles for their ability to help maintain wellness inside and out. And now you can get the benefits of hemp wherever your body needs it. The makers of Charlotte's Web, whole plant hemp extract oils and capsules now make topical creams and balms. This isn't just a little bit of their premium whole plant hemp extracts added to a soothing botanical blend. This is 300 milligrams of hemp extract per ounce. That's 3 times more than other topical brands. CW topical creams also feature oleosome technology to increase absorption hemp and key botanical ingredients. Learn more at cwhemp.com and use the promo code GOOD for 10% off CW products, including their new creams and balm. That's cwhemp.com/good. GOOD. Stay healthy while you train. Train with CW Hemp.
So, Matt, the FBI, the trial, everything's going on. These are some people you know. I mean, again, TJ Gasnola, you've worked with for years. He was certainly a guy who worked for Andy Miller and tried to help him. And he took the stand earlier today. We don't know everything he said, but I think he admitted certainly that he was involved in taking care of several players. What's your reaction on some of the things that have come out so far on this? Anything? What's the biggest surprise for you so far?
I guess the biggest surprise, not just with the trial, but with the whole case, is just the fact that they're trying to create the universities as victims in this, because they have to have a victim if they're going to have a crime. And the universities are billion-dollar, multi-million, some of them billion-dollar entities. And I just don't think that any of these situations really are to the standard of a federal crime, and that the schools are actually being defrauded. I haven't paid too close attention to the trial. I've read a few things. Obviously, I know a majority of the players involved, but I've kind of just blocked that out. It was a tough situation to be collateral damage in.
You also work with Christian Dawkins. He was kind of the key to all this. Very loose with kind of what he was doing, trying to recruit a different way, certain with financial guys. His defense is pretty much trying to say, listen, there was a pre-existing relationship here with Dawkins and Brian Bowen and Brian Bowen Sr. They've known each other a long time, and I think that's how they're trying to get around it. the other guys, Jim Gatto and Merle Code, their defense is saying more of, listen, these kids were already ineligible. They're already ineligible because they were being paid by AAU teams. So what Jim Gatto did and Merle Code didn't affect their eligibility because they were already ineligible to play college basketball legally because they had been paid. What's your take on?
If they can pull that off, that's a genius defense.
I think they may be able to. Listen, I wouldn't be shocked, but you've known Dawkins. Did you know his relationship with Bowen and how far it dated back? What do you think of Dawkins?
I mean, first of all, I think they're all going to walk. I think there's going to be all not guilties. And yeah, Dawkins is from Michigan, and we had known a lot about Bowen, since really Dawkins was involved with us. And I think that was when Bowen was like a freshman or sophomore in high school. So they definitely have, a pre-existing relationship for sure. I can attest to that. Dawkins and I didn't really get along. He was kind of doing his own thing. And like I said, I took a different track in how I was recruiting. So there was very little crossover as far as, recruiting or working together on any guys. He was kind of on his own program, on an island by himself.
Were you ever worried about, him and kind of how he was operating? And did you ever ask Andy why he brought him on board?
I think he brought him on board because he was a hustler and he was able to, bring some guys. I was never worried. I thought he was kind of diminishing the brand in a way because there was a lot of talk about things that were going on. It wasn't very secretive, and that talk was not like in our office. That talk was all over the basketball community. So I never thought in my wildest dreams that it would result in a federal indictment. I thought some of it could put a black mark on our group. People might not want to deal with us in certain scenarios, but by no means did I ever think a federal indictment was going to happen.
What did you think when you heard the ESPN story back in whatever it was, February, of a recording between Sean Miller, $100,000 payment with Christian Dawkins involving DeAndre Ayton? What was your first thought?
It was complete bullshit.
Why?
We never heard DeAndre Ayton's name. I never heard his name thrown around the office. In our recruiting meetings, we go through lists of who guys are recruiting, and I never heard DeAndre Ayton one time. So I don't think Christian Dawkins was involved with DeAndre Ayton on that level. And I don't think Sean Miller would have had that type of conversation with Christian Dawkins on the phone.
Did you have conversations like that with coaches? Did it get to that point where money was thrown around and, hey, listen, I'll take care of you if you send us this kid? How commonplace was that?
Well, I can speak on, situations I was directly involved with, specifically like with my AAU program. I never had to do any of that. I never tried to solicit money from any schools because at that point in time, the Florida Gators were on top of the world, and Billy Donovan was, the closest thing to Jesus Christ in Florida. So, kids in our program, they wanted to go to Florida. If I would have come to them and said, oh, you could get $50,000 to go to Maryland or Michigan or wherever, they'd probably look sideways at me like, why don't we just go to Florida? They just won a national championship. Billy Donovan's the best coach in college basketball. Why wouldn't we go to Florida? So I never involved myself in that. My kids went places that I knew the coaches. I knew they would be, taken care of, academically on the court. They would, work them hard and make sure that they went to class. So, mine were all relationship driven, and that bores out and where all my guys went to school. I had 10 guys I think I was connected to that went to Florida, and they were all Florida kids.
how dirty, when people ask how dirty college basketball is, how dirty the AAU, the agent, I mean, you've been in it. Again, you're saying you haven't done a whole lot other than give players, probably $100 here and there. And if they need money for whatever it is, meals or bills or something like that. But like, how dirty, how bad do you think it is? And like, how do you clean it up?
I think the agent business is dirty in a sense, but it's twofold. There's two ways that guys are getting paid. They're getting paid while they're in college or high school. Parents, handlers, AAU coaches are getting basically a stipend every month. Or once they become pros and sign their contract with an agent, they're getting paid, a signing bonus, which is perfectly legal. So you hear guys are getting paid this, you don't know, which direction they're going to. I mean, if I sign the number one pick in the draft, I could write him a check for $200,000 the day he signs the papers, and there's nothing wrong with that. So I think that there's some quid pro quo for sure, or at least a agreement that, hey, once this happens, once you sign, I'm going to cut you a check. And that's very rampant in football. That happens all the time in football that way.
But a lot of other agents are doing things in different ways, right? I mean, they're going to try to take care of kids while they're still in school to try to get them, try to build up as much equity as they have with these kids so that when they make a decision, they're saying, all right, we feel obligated to dealing with you. Did you run into that a lot, that was the fight you were dealing with? And how do you, again, is there anything you can do about it? The NCAA is trying to put rules in now where kids can have agents. Now there's stipulations on them, one of which is when the rules change, the one and done rules change, elite players, however the hell that's going to be categorized and decided, are going to be able to have agents coming out of high school, the elite players. And then if not, it's going to be players like after your freshman year. If you want to declare and get information from the NBA, get the evaluation, you can then hire an agent or an advisor. And if you go back to school, I think you have to discontinue your relationship with that advisor / agent. How do you think that's going to play out? And maybe do you have a better recommendation for how to deal with all this?
I just don't think there's any way to stop it. I think that the financial benefit for the agents is so strong and there's so much money on the table that, there's a lot of reasons to pay some of those top players. I don't really have a solution outside of just taking the prohibition completely away of kids not being able to have agents and just let them get paid, let them sign with an agent, let them play for their college institution, make that school millions upon millions of dollars, get their jersey sold in the store, and everybody wins. I mean, I don't see any downside to just opening it up. It's like legalizing marijuana. Just take the black market right out of it and just sell it in the store. I think that would just clean it up in the sense that they just let kids have agents, make their deals, and not worry about their college eligibility in that regard. Hold them to an academic standard and make them do what they need to academically to stay eligible, but just take the prohibition of not being able to have an agent away.
Yeah, I mean, listen, they're doing it anyway, and I don't understand this elite players thing, if they're allowed to. Well, just let anybody who an agent wants to. I mean, to me, the market's going to kind of regulate itself there. And all right, agents aren't going after the mid-major players unless they're elite, right? I mean, they're not. So just make it everybody. And I feel like that's like a lawsuit waiting to happen anyway. That you're going to say, well, the 20th best player, we're going to go with the 20 best players according to the combination of USA Basketball and some other knuckleheads who decide who the top 20 players are at this point, which is completely subjective. And number 21 is going to look at you and say, I'm going to see you. I'm going to see you. You can't decide number 20 because some people we're ranking 1 to 20 are allowed to, and I can't have an agent. Like, that's bullshit.
and number 65 in high school may end up being a top 5 pick.
Right. Right.
You know, I mean, that's
Trae Young.
the most
Trae Young.
Exactly. Most subjective situation. You know, there's no rhyme or reason behind it. Guys, you know, grow and mature, and you know, so that kid Trae Young should have been able to have an agent in high school if his dad wanted him to get advice. You know, they don't need to wait till they declare after their freshman year. I just think that there's so much regulation on it. If they just took all the regulation out of it, it would take the black market away.
Yeah. No, I agree. Hey, going back to Dawkins, how much did you know of what like Dawkins and Bowen's father and Dawkins and these other people? How much did you know of like what he was doing and how he was operating?
I never had any direct firsthand knowledge. You know, there was, you know, whispers in the industry about stuff that was going on. But I never, you know, was told directly by Dawkins, you know, what was going, you know, first of all, I didn't want to ever be involved in any of that. So part of me kind of kept Dawkins at arm's length, and, you know, he did his thing and I did my thing, and, you know, there was no real animus or, you know, competition. There's a lot of players out there. But I think, you know, there was definitely the perception that Dawkins was a mover and a shaker and getting things done somehow, some way. And, you know, I think the financial advisors are as complicit, you know, in some of this black market as the agents are.
So how does that work? All right. Yeah. Give me that. We never really got into it. We're going to wrap up here in a few minutes, but give me how the financial advisors have. It's been a boom over the last probably 10 years. And, you know, to me, there's, like you said, they're as heavily involved as anybody. And how do the coaches stay out of this thing? How do they, I always explain this to people, but how do the head coaches stay out, and what's the involvement of financial guys?
I mean, I think the head coaches and the assistant coaches just try to give themselves plausible deniability and just really look the other way unless something is brought directly to them that they have to deal with. I'm sure they all know there's things going on behind the scenes, but the financial advisors, I think, are ultimately the ones that are putting up a lot of money, you know, working side by side with some of the agents to kind of co-recruit players. And, you know, if the financial advisor gets the relationship, then he can kind of help deliver the agent or vice versa. But I think that
what's a good example? What's a good example of that? Is there a good example of like an agent financial guy that work together that have it going? And again, they're both using their relationships, and then when, you know, the agent signs the kid, he's automatically putting him with that financial guy. It's business. It's smart business in a way, isn't it?
It's very smart business. And if this was happening in any other industry, it wouldn't be frowned upon or even deemed to be unacceptable. I mean, there's, you know, take baseball or tennis or, you know, these kids golf, you know, these kids are becoming pros at 16, 17 years old and getting major endorsement deals and, you know, financial contracts from whoever. And it's fine, I guess, just because they're not going to college, you know, so, or if the kids are just allowed to go pro out of high school, that would solve a lot of this too, because, you know, if a kid's a senior in high school and you pay him and he's not going to college, then you're not committing any crimes, I guess, by the letter of the FBI, because you're not defrauding a university. So, again, take the regulation out of forcing the kids to go to college and just allow them to have agents. And I think this, you know, black cloud would be lifted in some way, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think it'll help. But I think they need to just kind of blanket it and just say, you know what, we're going to let kids have agents, have advisors. I think they feel like they have no choice but to do certain things the NCAA does to make it look good on the surface. But they still want to control as much as possible. And the one thing the commission led by Condoleezza Rice didn't do was address amateurism. And I don't know how you do it if you open the floodgates and allow these kids to be paid whatever they're worth, or you set some parameters on it. But I think ultimately that's the thing I was very disappointed in, that they couldn't come up with some solution or some recommendation. All the other things.
That commission was a joke. The commission was a joke. Condoleezza Rice, tremendous Secretary of State. Think very highly of her. Think she's a tremendous human being. But she has no idea what's going on in college basketball. And, they had some former coaches and players that are far removed from all. They didn't have anybody.
Mike Montgomery. You think he was in the trenches ever at Stanford? Come on.
Never. Zero. So, if they would have had somebody that would have been in the trenches and could help tell the story a little bit, I think that would have, been able to make that commission have some validity. But I think that was a joke.
Hey, what did you make a year from like Adidas? Because here's one of the things I've kind of questioned lately is, all right, like Nike paid Marvin Bagley legally to run an AAU program for a couple of years. Adidas paid Zion Williamson's godfather, I believe, for, a couple of years legally to run an AAU team. Why the hell doesn't Adidas and Nike do that with every kid? Every kid in the top 25. Why wouldn't you just say, hey, listen, to the kids' parents, pick somebody. You want to run the program, you can. If you don't, pick a relative, pick a good friend. They're going to run it. You can be just a figurehead. I don't care. You could stand there and run it for all you want, and we'll bring you a coach. We'll bring you somebody who can coach, and we're going to pay $100,000 or whatever it is legally. I don't understand that.
They should do that, and I thought that's what they were doing. And then when I hear, a lot of the salacious information that's coming out of, the indictments, that Adidas was paying these guys, I'm thinking to myself, why didn't they just put them under contract? It's
so
been
sloppy.
Going on forever.
Yeah, sloppy.
It's been going on forever, and it's completely above board. I mean, my situation, now granted, I wasn't coming in with a Zion Williamson or a Marvin Bagley. I was starting my program from scratch. Well, that was a couple years after the program was a couple years old after that. But, I got a 3-year contract to start for $50,000 for the travel, and they paid me, a $20,000 salary to, promote Adidas in Florida.
So 50 a year, 50 a year, Matt, plus 25 a year
to travel
for you.
50 plus 20.
So $70,000 a year.
But that 50 plus some of the 20 all got wiped away in the travel.
You're paying, you're paying for events and whatnot. Sure.
Oh, we traveled. That's why a lot of the kids wanted to come play for us, because we stayed at, Marriott's, and we ate good. We didn't eat at McDonald's, and we flew everywhere. We didn't drive anywhere. So, all that money got spent. And I was actually up for a new contract in 2012 when I got banned, and with the number one program in the country. We had Chris Walker and Casey Hill, who a lot of people don't think those are big names now, but those two kids were top 10 players in the country, McDonald's All-Americans. Joel Embiid, obviously everybody knows him.
You didn't play him, Matt. You didn't play him much.
Yeah, my coaches were idiots. I had nothing to do with the coaching. So we were on the verge. I think I would have got a pretty substantial deal. I probably would have got at least 100 a year, maybe 1.25, because we had solidified ourselves as one of the top programs in the country, and definitely in Florida, and had really enhanced the Adidas brand in Florida. So, I felt like it was going to be a big deal. And then NCAA came along, and the rest is history.
Well, listen, we appreciate you joining us. I could spend another 45 minutes with you easy, and maybe we'll do a part 2.
I'd love to come back anytime.
Yeah, I think maybe we can do a part 2 of this once maybe the trial gets everything kind of comes out of it, and really the big question comes next. Like, even if these 3 guys do walk, what happens to all the people that the accusations were made on, right? Like Oregon and Creighton and Arizona with Joe Pasternak and all these other players. Like, what does the NCAA do? I think that's something we definitely have to kind of wait and see. how they approach this whole thing, especially if Jim Gatto, Merle Code, and Christian Dawkins end up walking. But I appreciate you coming on and sharing some insight of certainly the world that you've lived in over the years, and we'll definitely have you back on again. Thanks, man.
Sounds great, Jeff. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
You got it, Matt. Thanks for joining us. Another edition of Good and Plenty in the books. Remember, you can join us every Tuesday for the NBA version of Good and Plenty, every Thursday for the college version. Subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, CLNS Media. You can find me at Good and Hoops on Twitter. I work for Stadium, so you can go to Watch Stadium for all my stuff, written, video, you name it, TV. We do a show every day from 10 to 11 Eastern on Watch Stadium, so it's a great place to get some more information, especially from the college standpoint. Thanks for Matt Ramker for coming on and sharing some insight into the world of grassroots basketball, and thanks to my stellar producer, Chris Grenham, who has filled in, co-hosting. I know he took a back seat on this one, but he'll be back soon as well to talk some college hoops. So we'll see you next week. Thanks again.